Hello, my name is Rain and welcome to my channel where I discuss Fantasy Formula 1. In today's video, we're going to discuss every single meta team that I've seen online right now and what I think the best transfer is going to be for that team, or the best strategy rather for that team is going to be like heading into Austria, Silverstone, and then into the sprint race at Spa. We have a lot of things to discuss. I'm sorry that this video is a tad bit late. I would have liked to get it out on Monday, but on Monday, I went and saw the new F1 movie. I thought it was pretty good. I think you should probably go see it if you're an F1 fan. I think it's quite fun to point out the things that are wrong with it. But also, it's just incredibly well produced, and I really enjoyed seeing all the drivers and the team principals have lines in the movie, and listening to Crofty's commentary and stuff like that. So enough about the F1 movie. I'm not going to talk about that. What I am going to talk about though is the fact that we have a deadline stream on Saturday, 2 hours before qualifying starts, 2 hours before the deadline. Make sure to be there. It's going to be a very important one. But you already knew that. We're always there. So thank you so much for being there for those live streams. Like the video, subscribe, and let's get into discussing the first meta team that I haven't discussed yet. What I mean by that is, if you want to see what I'm doing with my team, my main team, I posted my team selection video last week. Go check that out. This is another one of my teams. It's actually the team that I have with the highest budget. And because I had a really high budget with this team, I made the switch to Lando Norris on this team last week. Obviously, that did not end up working out. That leaves me with 2 free transfers on this team. I think if you're on a Lando Norris team with 3 free transfers, I think you just sell Lando Norris, because you're going to have 2 free transfers anyway if you want to keep a transfer going into the next weeks. The reason why we want to look to find a transfer to sort of move over to the next week and have 3 transfers in the bank pretty soon is because, especially for us with higher budget teams, we're going to be close to a 2-2 lineup pretty soon. A 2-2 lineup meaning a 2 premium driver, 2 premium constructor lineup. And I do think that's going to be meta come Spa, or maybe like Hungary, or definitely Hungary, and especially after the summer break. So because we want to switch to a 2-2 lineup pretty soon, that's going to mean like tearing up our teams quite significantly. And when that happens, we're going to want to have 3 free transfers or a wild card available. If you have a wild card, obviously, I don't think you need to save transfers this week or in any of the future weeks. I think you just do all the transfers you can to optimize your team now, and then use the wild card to move to the 2-2 lineup when you want to. But for those of us who've already used the wild card, it's important to save a transfer soon. That does not mean it has to be this week. It could be next week. But I do think you're going to want to have 3 free transfers, for Spa. Now, let's talk about Lando Norris, particularly Lando Norris in a McLaren Ferrari team, or at least a 2 premium constructor team. I think Lando Norris with Piastri and McLaren and something like a VCARB or a Kick Sauber is a very, very different beast to tackle, and we're going to do that in the next section of the video. So, on teams that look like this, I think the main key thing that you need to look at is like, how rich are you actually? Because this team could probably survive a Lando Norris price drop. Lando Norris could definitely pop up with a win next week in Austria. Well, with a win this weekend in Austria. Is it super likely? We'll see. We don't know if McLaren has properly fallen off yet. I don't suspect that's the case. I think Canada was just a bad race for them. So, I'm not going to take, the McLaren flop too seriously. Not until I've seen it 2 weekends in a row. So for that reason, Lando Norris could definitely be the best driver for points this week. And the main problem with Lando Norris, let me just quickly go to the budget builder side, right, on F1 Fantasy Tools, is that Lando Norris needs a lot of points to increase in price, meaning that you're losing budget, meaning that you might not hit the break point that you want for the 2-2 lineup when that comes around in 2-3 races time. You might not be able to get the cheap drivers you want, stuff like that. So a price drop now is tough, I will say. But at least if you're already on decent cheap assets, I think it's completely fine to keep Lando Norris, especially if you have the budget to upgrade them. What I mean by that is, like, I could just upgrade Gabriel Bortoleto here to Fernando Alonso. And if I had like 0.2 more, I could upgrade Colapinto to Pierre Gasly as well. I'm 0.2 million short from doing that. So if you're slightly richer than what this team is, and you're on Lando Norris, I think 2 transfers to bring in Gasly and Alonso is a perfectly fine move to make, and just keep Lando Norris, take them, negative 0.1 million or whatever, which is going to be like a 0.4 million swing compared to like Piastri owners. I think that's fine if you have the correct cheap assets. The real problem with Norris comes when you can't afford to upgrade. So let's say you don't even have Nico Hülkenberg in here. Let's say your team looks something like this. I think this is when Lando Norris is probably a must sell, right? Because you're gonna want to get both Alonso and Nico Hülkenberg this week, and I might even consider doing that for a -10. If you cannot upgrade Lawson and Bortoleto to Fernando Alonso and Nico Hülkenberg without downgrading Norris, I think taking a -10 this week is totally fine. Like, actually completely a fine, viable strategy. I think Nico Hülkenberg and Fernando Alonso are that important this week, because if you fall behind on their like 0.6 million increases for this race and maybe even next race as well, you're gonna miss out on the 2-2 lineup when that comes around in 2-3 races time, because I promise you that will be the team everyone moves to, right? Kimi Antonelli, if he's now properly counted as a B tier asset, he's going to be meta as soon as that DNF that he had is out of the equation, right? So a team like Piastri, Kimi Antonelli, McLaren, Mercedes could be a really strong team to have, and if you don't have the budget for it, that's going to suck, and you're definitely not going to have the budget for it if you're sticking around with assets like Liam Lawson. Now, granted, it is quite annoying to take a -10, but I do think that like Alonso and Hülkenberg this week in particular are that important that I would definitely consider doing a -10 for them. So if you're on a team like this and you have less money in the bank, I mean, I think Norris is a must-sell for you. But unless you're in that position, I don't think Norris is like a must-sell. You could definitely consider keeping him if you think that McLaren and Norris in particular look strong in practice in Austria. But for teams like this then, who can simply just, you know, do Bortoleto up to Fernando Alonso and call it a day, save a transfer now, keep Norris, eat the points drop, but don't want to eat the points drop. Well, I mean, you could straight up just do this and have 6.7 million in the bank ready for a final fix if you want to. I think that's totally fine. And then in Silverstone, you make one transfer upgrading Colapinto to something like Carlos Sainz. If Carlos Sainz still looks good by that point, I think that is a totally fine move. And then you look towards Spa to make that switch with 3 free transfers to a 2-2 lineup. You could also, even if you like already have Hülkenberg, even if you're on like this exact team that I have in front of me right now, I'm considering doing a -10 here as well if I want to sell Lando Norris. The reason for that is because if you get ahead of the curve with an aggressive points hit this week and gain budget from it, that again could be massive in terms of reaching a really good 2-2 lineup in 2 races time when I think they will be meta. The way I would do that is basically what I just showed you that you should do over 2 races time, but you just do it this race instead. So you begin by picking up, I think it's probably Oscar Piastri is the safest option always. Probably Carlos Sainz, and then probably, definitely Fernando Alonso. If you're on a slightly lower budget than this, Carlos Sainz could definitely be Pierre Gasly as well. This is sort of what I was eyeing up on my main team, but that has a slightly lower budget than this. This is a super flexible team still, even with... I mean, this is a super flexible team, even if you have a lower budget than what I have in the cost cap. And you're definitely ready for the 2-2 lineup. You take the points hit now, you gain the budget on Gasly or Carlos Sainz or whoever else you buy in, right? Because these 4 assets, you know, let's put Carlos Sainz in there. These 4 assets look prime for a good price increase in Austria, especially if we have good overtaking opportunities. Obviously, look at practice and what the drivers are saying about the car and stuff like that. But I do think for Norris owners who are on 2 premium constructors that don't want to sell their constructors now, which I don't think you should do, by the way. I think if you're selling anything this week, it is Lando Norris. It's not like McLaren or Ferrari to go to a VCARB or whatever. It's definitely Lando Norris. I think it's fine to take a -10 this week. And again, if you have 3 free transfers and Lando Norris, I mean, you're just fine. You can just sell Lando Norris for free and do 1 more transfer and still have 1 in the bank, or just use all your 3 transfers and all your 3 free transfers and make sure you save 1 next week. The power with this as well, compared to the one where you do 2 transfers and then you make the Carlos Sainz move in Silverstone instead, is that, well, something could happen to your assets and you might need to sell something in Silverstone. And if you've already booked in a transfer of Colapinto up to Sainz or whatever, then that hurts, because you might have to keep Colapinto. Say if, I don't know, Hülkenberg and Alonso are going to increase even if the DNF. Say Hadjar DNFs and you have to sell Hadjar next week. It would be really annoying to have to do that while still keeping Colapinto, which is an asset you would want to sell at that point. So I think the -10 for Norris owners is definitely on the table, and I think if you know, I would limit myself to how many points hits I take during a season, but this is definitely a week where I think it could pay off to do it for budget wise and do that final little bit of budget building push to make sure you're ready for that big, you know, shift in the meta that is fast approaching. What then if you have a team like this? You know, we have Lando, Norris, Piastri, McLaren, and Racing Bulls, right? This is also a very, very high cost team. You would need to have a high budget to afford this. I have Hadjar in here. Some people will have Liam Lawson instead of Hadjar and obviously be well worse off. I think this is a much trickier situation to discuss. What do you do if you're in this situation? Well, one, you need McLaren to perform, right? That is the main thing. If McLaren looks bad, you're in some trouble. I think if McLaren looks bad, right, Lando Norris is must sell. Lando Norris is the easy sell in this team to I mean, significantly improve the team. It also depends on how many transfers you have, but even on this team, if McLaren looks bad, you could do 1, and then you could do something like 2, and then you could do something like 3. The reason I would do something like this and leave this much money in the bank is, again, going pure budget building with keeping Racing Bulls. Obviously, you could choose to, you know, keep Colapinto and just do this, right? And go back to the meta that we just talked about. But obviously, that's not as fun. I think the main reason why a lot of people are sitting on teams like this, one was because of, you know, the McLaren dominance, but I think a very good... I think there's a very good chance that people with these teams are either hard on the budget building or they're preparing a budget building team for Spa or Hungary where they will Limitless. So if you have a Limitless, I think this team is still really, really good. The problem is that you're essentially sacrificing, unless again you have a higher budget than what I have, and I've seen teams that look like this with Liam Lawson in it with no money in the bank. On a team like this, you don't have the 2 cheap assets that are going to increase in price. And I'm saying going because they're going to. Like Alonso and Hulkenberg are increasing 0.6 million. So you're budget building with Racing Bulls, but you're losing budget because you have bad cheap assets. So because Alonso and Hulkenberg are so good, I think this team has like massively diminished in value. I think it was pretty good not in Canada obviously, but in the weekends before that, when McLaren were still, you know, looking dominant. So what I would do if I had literally no money on this team, or like no money in the bank, and I had this team, I mean, Lawson is a must sell, but if you have no money in the bank, how do you upgrade him? You can't, right? I think the correct way to play this team while keeping the triple McLaren and actually budget building with a cheap constructor is to go to kick. And then upgrade 1 or 2 of the cheap assets here, depending on if you want to take a point hit or if you have a transfer available or not. And you just go straight to, I mean, the GOATs, right? I put Bortoletto in there so you don't lose value, and you put Fernando Alonso in here. I think you do a -10. At this point, you're playing aggressive anyway with a cheap constructor. Just drop the point, just to drop the -10 points and keep budget building and hope McLaren performs. Triple kick, terrifying. Like that. This doesn't look fun. Maybe I keep Colapinto in here, but just for the safety against Kick Sauber shenanigans. But I think you do something like this, right? If you want to keep the cheap constructor build going and actually budget build, because you're not budget building if you have Liam Lawson and Gabriel Bortoletto with VCARB. You're losing budget to like Piastri teams with 2 premium constructors, and you're probably losing out on points as well, right? So if you are going to make a triple McLaren team work with a cheap constructor, you actually have to have good cheap assets. You can't sit there rocking VCARB anymore. Straight up. I don't think you can do that. So for that reason, I do think Lando Norris could either be a keep or a sell. And you saw the difference, right? That say that you keep Racing Bulls here. You could, instead of going for Lando Norris, or instead of selling Racing Bulls, if you don't want to go for Kick Sauber and you want to keep Racing Bulls in there for a particular reason, the 3 transfers you do on the points hits could either be to do Lando Norris to a cheap asset and like actually budget build with like 29 million in the bank for 2 races, or you get the second best assets, or like technically even the best asset up here. You get Russell in, meaning that you're already sort of semi-prepared for the 2-2 lineup. So let's go back here. You sell Lando Norris to George Russell. If Norris is the one you want to sell and not VCARB, right? Which technically would probably be better for budget building, right? You sell Norris for Russell. You sell, again, I'm assuming now you had, where are they? Liam Lawson and Bortoleto, that this was your team with Norris here, right? Let me just bring up the team. I'm assuming this was your team, right? You could also, instead of selling Racing Bulls to Kick Sauber, you could do this. And you could get this. Oh, well, no, it wouldn't be Sainz. It would be Hulkenberg and Alonso. That puts 8.1 million in the bank. Obviously, ideally, you would, get like a Carlos Sainz in there over Colapinto, or a Pierre Gasly even. I think if you have 3 free transfers and you're willing to take a -10 hit, I think you could do that. I don't think you take a -20 point hit just to switch Colapinto to Gasly or Carlos Sainz. I don't think you do that in any world, even when you're like mega budget building or whatever. But yeah, Hulkenberg and Alonso must-haves, and if you don't have them in this sort of triple McLaren team, I think you need to get them. Obviously, if you're lucky enough to have that team with like Alonso instead of like a Bortoleto or a Colapinto, you're definitely better off. You can maybe afford to just do Norris and one of the cheap assets to like Russell and Hulkenberg. But if you're on that team where you didn't have Fernando Alonso as one of your cheap 4.5 million assets last week, then yes, I do think you need to take a -10 points hit. And again, I think -10 points hits are really viable this weekend. Well, what about those that already switched to Mercedes from Ferrari to Mercedes last week? I haven't spoken about Mercedes that much at all, which I think a lot of people will find surprising. It seems like a super obvious move after their brilliant performance in Canada to get Mercedes in if they're going to perform this well. But I don't think it's that obvious. Like, Ferrari were not that far away, and granted, like, no one was expecting Mercedes to double podium that week. And even then, they were only like 20 points. What? Like 20 points above Ferrari, I believe? Or was it 30 points? It doesn't matter. I don't think Ferrari is a bad option. I don't think Mercedes is must-buy by any means. But if you're on a Mercedes bill, I think you have the easiest time of anyone, right? Because even those of us with McLaren and Ferrari, sure, our teams look good for points if Ferrari perform, and maybe we even outscored those of you with Mercedes in the team, but now Mercedes look guaranteed to increase in price, and it's a very likely thing that when we get to those 2-2 lineups that I've been screaming about for 2 weeks straight, they're going to include Mercedes in one, in some shape or form. Maybe it's with Ferrari Mercedes, or it's with McLaren Mercedes, because McLaren Ferrari 2-2 teams are going to be very, very difficult to afford, especially if you want to keep Piastri in there. So those of you with Mercedes who made the switch to Mercedes in Canada, congratulations to your fantastic play, but also don't change it. Just stick. Do not sell Mercedes or McLaren in any way, shape, or form. You hold that until, when something else happens, right? I just cooked together a likely team here. Insane budget in the bank. You know what you need to get. Just get Fernando Alonso. I've said that a million times. Just get Fernando Alonso. You need to sell Liam Lawson. Just get Carlos Sainz. And at this point, you have so much budget that I think you definitely get Carlos Sainz over Pierre Gasly. In my team selection video, where money was a bit tight because you're sitting with a Ferrari asset in here instead of Mercedes, I was considering going for Gasly over Carlos Sainz just to have that flexibility to much more easily move to a 2-2 lineup, or the 2-2 lineup that I want in 2 races time. Whereas, like, if I lock myself into Carlos Sainz, that's like an extra transfer that I might have to get rid of later if I actually want to afford what I can afford. But if you're on a Mercedes build, just get Carlos Sainz, man, and just rock this. This team looks amazing. I think this team looks really, really good. It's not something I would rush to sell Ferrari to Mercedes. I would rather save the transfer and use it later when I know which asset I want, if I want to sell the McLaren asset or if I want to sell the Ferrari assets. But Mercedes are definitely hot commodity, and even though I don't think it's mandatory that you buy them, those of you who do have them are definitely sitting pretty, because I do think that everyone will want to buy them soon. So it's just that we don't know who to sell yet. We don't like if McLaren aren't good anymore, or they're not like dominant anymore. Perhaps the high price of the McLaren constructor means we want to sell McLaren to Mercedes rather than selling Ferrari to Mercedes. So the problem is not like, do we want to buy Mercedes, yes or no? The answer is yes in like 3 races time, almost certainly. The problem is we don't know who to sell yet, and until we have more information, especially from these 2 weekends coming up, I feel like we could potentially make some mistakes if we buy Mercedes too early, because they're not must-owns, right? But I do think they're going to be must-owns pretty soon. So if you're on a Mercedes build, you have the easiest time of your life. Just get the best cheap assets and rock out, build some more budgets, and hope that you can have what you need in terms of budget when you get to the 2-2 lineup split sometime in you know, probably like a Kimi Antonelli build in Silverstone or in Spa or in Hungary. So yeah, Mercedes owners, I'm jealous of you. Well, what do you then do if instead of Mercedes, you're sitting there with Red Bull Racing? Yes, this is an actual team of mine. It's not performing very well. I think you're in a bit more trouble here. Granted, Red Bull Racing could definitely increase in price. They just need 22 points. 22 points is more than doable for an asset like Red Bull Racing. So it's not like they're must-sells, but they're more difficult to keep a hold of, that's for sure. So in the case where you don't have Ferrari, McLaren, or McLaren Mercedes, but you do have Red Bull in there, I do think a like actual good move to make this week is to just actually get Mercedes here. And I know I just said we don't know who to sell, but I know I'm not going to have Red Bull Racing when we get to the 2-2 lineup split, right? Red Bull Racing are quite expensive. Like I'm either doing Ferrari Mercedes. You're never going to need Red Bull Racing Mercedes unless you're like super poor and you want to try and squeeze like super weird out there 2-2 lineup into your team. I think most of us can afford either Ferrari Mercedes or McLaren Mercedes. So I don't think Red Bull Racing is going to be in our plans in the future, like 4 or 5 races, or at least like up until the summer break, until we see some performance increase from Yuki Tsunoda, the second seat of Red Bull, whoever's going to sit there, right? So for that reason, I think Red Bull Racing teams right now should probably just switch to Mercedes. Again, Mercedes, because very likely to increase in price, and also because I do think that you're gonna want to have them soon anyway. So you just get ahead of the curve by making the transfer now. In addition to that, this team is sitting here with Liam Lawson. It's also sitting with 3 free transfers, so maybe you have 3 free transfers, I don't know. But I feel like this team is quite easy to make the moves for. It's just what I've said this entire time. It's the same sort of transfer, same sort of strategy, but this time you prioritize actually selling the constructor to Mercedes, and you get the good cheap assets in, whether that's Carlos Sainz or whether that's a Gasly. Again, I don't care. Do what you want, but this sort of team is probably what I would move to if I was on a Red Bull team. And again, if you only have 2 free transfers, and I don't think you must take a minus 10 points hit on this sort of team. I think the main thing is just sell Liam Lawson, get Mercedes, and I think you're good to go. That's what I would do, and that's probably what I am going to do on this team. Though since I have 3 free transfers on this one, I'm actually probably going to make this move as well, and I'm probably doing Gasly here because my budget on this team is much lower. But Rain, I hear you say, what if my budget is bad? What if my budget looks like something like this at 109 million? This is my 3rd team that I've just been trolling on, testing out stuff that didn't end up working, and now I'm barely making transfers on it anymore. This is more difficult. The entire video so far has been talking about 2-2 lineups, right? 2 premium drivers, 2 premium constructors, and how we're going to afford those, or how we're going to move to those, assuming that we will afford those. But if you're on 109 million, like if you're on below 110 million at this point, it's going to be very difficult to afford. I mean, you could probably squeeze like a Kimi Antonelli team in there. Maybe, Let me just start cooking right here, right now, and see if, there's some opportunity here. Yeah, it's looking pretty grim, right? 2.6 million. You could probably get there with another 4.5 million assets, right? Liam Lawson is going to hit 4.5 million after next race. So you could probably get to this team. And like, is this team bad? I in 3 races time, I don't necessarily think so. Maybe this is what you have to prepare to move to. Maybe you're one who actually has to look at Red Bull Racing in terms of how to get the 2-2 lineup working. But I mean, this you could definitely afford, but this would require McLaren to not be dominant. Like, if McLaren are dominant, the McLaren lineups are going to win. So what I will say is that low budget teams, for now, continue playing your game, right? Make the correct moves, which is like, just get Alonso, get Hulkenberg, make sure you don't have any asset that's guaranteed to drop in price. Play it safe, like so many of us have played throughout the season so far. Don't do anything drastic. Just follow this, right? For probably two more races. And then, after you get to that midpoint in the season, or perhaps after Spa, assess what your budget is, what you can afford, and how to get there. Because if you're on a lower budget and there are people you either need to catch or people you need to fend off in terms of points, some people have high points but low budget totals if they've been playing the points game correctly but not the budget game correctly. What I would say is that there are ways to build teams that can beat 2-2 teams, optimal 2-2 teams, while just taking minimal risks. And I'm going to discuss those in a future video, right? Right now, I think the easy strat for those of you with super low budgets is to just play it safe, right? Get Alonso, get Hulkenberg, bide your time. Because right now, you don't need the 2-2 lineup because not that many people have it anyway, right? And those who already are sitting on like Piastri, Russell, McLaren, Mercedes teams, you're not fighting them anyway. But you can fight those of us who haven't moved to the 2-2 yet. And I will discuss that when the time comes. So when I personally can see the 2-2, lineup division working for my teams, I will immediately drop a video on how to salvage a low-budget team during those trying times where you're going to sit there and watch all those people afford those super high-budget teams with Piastri and Russell and McLaren and Mercedes and, Fernando Alonso in there as well. I will make a video then to discuss how I think you can, save your season, right? That's going to come either in the midpoint in the season or during the summer break, depending on how this 2-2 timeline. I've said 2. How many times have I said 2-2 this video? Someone put a counter down below, please, in the comments. Whenever the 2-2 lineup falls into place, I will drop a video on how you save your season if you're on a lower budget that can't afford those kinds of teams. But for now, the tip for you on a lower budget is to just play it as safe as possible. Don't take any risks. Don't move your premium around. Just stick with Piastri. Get Fernando Alonso in there. Do what you can, right? And I'm sure it's going to work out eventually. Now, the final thing we're going to talk about is this little beautiful chip right here. Because on my second team, on my main account, the one with the Red Bull constructor that I showed you 2 examples ago, I haven't used this chip a chip yet. Not a single one. The plan for this team was to use every chip at the second half of the season and see how that went. So I haven't used my Limitless yet. And I know there's a few of you out there who've also not used your Limitless yet. I think the 2 main points to use your Limitless will be in Spa or Hungary. And I think if you do it later than that, you're probably missing out on it too much because, again, by that point, people will have 2-2 teams, meaning that you're not going to gain as much points on them as you perhaps could have. So, what is the Limitless strategy? Well, for one, don't have Red Bull in there. But what you can do on these sorts of teams is actually begin preparing for a cheap constructor build. I would consider sacrificing essentially Silverstone by running a team with I don't know how much money in the bank. So what you could do on this team is obviously this team was Red Bull Racing, but let's assume for a second that it's Mercedes, right? This team is slightly lower budget. Let's assume that it's Mercedes here, and then we had Liam Lawson on this team. Just make your free transfers, switch those cheap assets around the way that makes sense. We've already talked about it a million times. And then in Silverstone, you literally just straight up, either with Mercedes down or McLaren, you just go to whichever cheap constructor looks most likely to increase in price. Because then you limitless in Spa, and then you gain the budget gains from these teams in the back, and then you're ready to move to a 2-2 team after. Granted, I think this works best if you have the wild card, because you're gonna need a lot of transfer to transform this sort of team into a good 2-2 lineup after a limitless. Because reminder, if you use your limitless, even if you've saved a transfer, the next week you're only going to have 2 free transfers. So if you have the wild card as well, I think this works really well. You could also consider not sacrificing Limitless, not sacrificing Silverstone, and instead sacrificing Spa. This is a sprint weekend, meaning that if you get it correctly with the cheap assets, you could maybe gain some points, or at least not lose as many points as you would in a single weekend. So you could move to this sort of team, or again, this kicks out, but you know, Aston Martin maybe, if they look super likely to increase in price, in Spa, and then after Spa, you limitless in Hungary, if you're more of a single race weekend kind of limitless player. So you could do that. What you also could do is move to that the triple McLaren, one cheap constructor lineup that we showed earlier. Only this time you do it with a cheaper one that's not racing balls, right? That's something like a Kick Sauber. And here you obviously don't go for Lando Norris, you go for George Russell. So let me just put Nico Hülkenberg down here. So you go 2 free transfers, one of your cheap constructors out, one of your bad cheap drivers out to Russell. And then from here on, this team again has 3 free transfers. I'm going to do this as well to make sure I get Fernando Alonso in there. And suddenly you have a team that looks really good for budget, looks decent for points, and that you can limitless with very, very happily, knowing that you likely can squeeze out a few extra dollars while you limitless in either Spa or Hungary. So I think that's what you should do if you have the limitless, and you're on literally either strategy, right? You could also just keep going with premium constructors, and then you go back to literally any of the previous examples I just showed you, right? Depending on what you were at the start, were you on a McLaren, McLaren, Ferrari, Norris sort of lineup, with your limitless still in play. You could just take those examples and just then use your limitless without doing anything special for it. But if you do have your limitless, you can choose to play the upcoming weeks in a way to set it up optimally in terms of budget gain, to have an even better 2-2 lineup ready to go after you do that. Though I do think that is the strongest if you also have the wildcard available, because after the limitless, since this is so late in the season, you're immediately going to want to switch away from that budget building team. And if you don't have a wildcard to do that, it's going to cost you a bunch of points. And at that point, you limitless for what purpose, right? You lost a bunch of points doing it. So I think the sort of setting your team up for a limitless, like we did earlier in the season, is only really viable if you also have the wildcard available. Maybe it's still viable anyway, but it's going to take you an extra week to actually utilize that budget. And at this point, if you're budget building, like going aggressively on the budget building, you're going to want to be able to use it soon, because what's the point of having an extra 2 million in the budget or whatever if you get to the 2-2 lineup one race later than everyone else anyway, right? Sure, you might have a slightly better 2-2 lineup with like a, Hadjar instead of a, Bortoletto, because you got 2 extra million in there. But other people who are poorer than you are still on the 2-2 build, and they got their one race earlier and got the points for it. So I think the main thing to do if you want to prep your team for a limitless is to actually make sure you have the wildcard available, or know that like you actually need to get a lot of value out of that limitless budgets to make sure that's worth it at the end of the season, because other than that, it might not end up being worth it. This video is already way too long. Thank you so much for watching. My final thoughts regarding the game week will probably be out on Friday if I have the time. Thank you so much for watching. This video was a long one. It's gonna take me ages, absolutely ages to edit. Oh my god. See you on the deadline stream. Thank you so much. If you made it this far, I mean, like the video. I literally cannot breathe. I'm so tired. I've been talking for way too long. I need to cut down so much of that. I've been recording for like an hour and a half. Yikes.